So I already have the painting blocked in with all my flats, and I like to paint my flats with just lasso tools, keep things very, very graphic, because I think that's where you're really putting in the foundation of the design. And if it doesn't read well or strong with your main silhouette, then you're kind of just polishing something less than what it is. It's the polishing the turd. And not that all your shapes are necessarily turds, but I think a lot of times we don't give enough credence to the initial silhouette before we go in to try to detail it. If your image, I always tell myself, if the image doesn't read in just flat shapes and silhouettes, then you've got a problem. And you got to fix those issues before you move on to the rendering aspects. Um, so as I said, I like to get those in using a lasso tool. Sometimes I'll use the pen tool to make things nice and smooth. And that to me is uh, paramount. After I've got that in, then especially for this style, for this children's book I'm working on, I want all of my edges to be rough, almost like it's been either dry brushed or loose, painted on some sort of textured surface, so you don't really get those perfectly sharp edges, which often just feels too digital. And so I put them in immediately. That's like the first step I'm doing after I've locked in the shape. That way I can just lock the transparency of that layer and begin painting all of the lighting and surface details without having to ever worry again about the edges until maybe the very end when I'm going to do some touch-ups. So I went around and I roughened up all the edges for the objects I'm about to paint. And then I'm going in and beginning to start with a lighting pass and then into some more detail. You can overcomplicate things a lot where you kind of create too many layers. So I never like to think of my base paint layer as overly precious. It is precious because you took a lot of time to make it, but that doesn't mean you have to build up all of your texture and shadows on separate layers. Especially when you have a scene with so many objects as this one does, where I'd end up with way too many layers to manage, and it would be a real pain in the butt to do that. So be a little bit more bold about it, lock it in, say, nope, I'm going to paint on that layer, and that's okay, move on with it, right? The most important thing is still preserved, which is the silhouette of that layer shape. A little tip, in Photoshop, you can change what kind of icon or image is displayed on the layer. I like to set it to the bounds of the layer, not the bounds of the entire document, and I set them to extra large. That way it's very easy when I use the move tool and I tap on part of my painting, which will automatically select that layer, then I can just visually see, yes, I'm on the right layer, and continue. One of the processes I've been using for this one is I kind of start everything at its darkest value, usually, not always, but a lot of these, you'll see I have my swatches on the left for the colors of my characters so that I can stay consistent throughout the book. But I'm liking to start dark, and then immediately I try to put in either the Terminator so I can get the divide the light from the dark with its most contrast. So I have like the highest brights, not highlights, just sort of what you would call an end light if you were doing a lighting exercise. So if you look at those spheres, you'll see end light. That's not the highlight or the reflective light. It's just the sort of the brightest value of the diffuse, kind of minus any sort of specular reflection. So I look at the end light and then the shadow color, not occlusion, and I'll typically follow the halfway to black rule as a starting point. And if you don't know what that is, check out one of my videos on halfway to black. So once I've kind of got that in those two light side dark sides, then I'll go ahead and bring in the half tones, start blending. I've in some of these, for the crab character in particular, I have 4 swatches to help with the blending. That way I kind of have my crab dark and crab darker those two colors. I consider those are on the shadow side of the Terminator, and my medium and lights are on the light side of the Terminator. Um, you'll also notice here on some of these, I'll actually just kind of start by painting in the highlight, or not the highlight, well, let's just call it the end light, because I don't put the highlight in until last. So I do the end light and then kind of work my way into the rest of the form. Always think of every form or volume as something more primitive, and how you would light that if it was just more of a large glob object, as opposed to trying to think right away about all the intricacies. And that really goes in when you start working with human uh, structures like hands and anatomy. You've still got to think of it first. Like the head, first of all, it's a ball. So keep the roundness of the head. Otherwise, you can end up with a really flat face. Which, by the way, on this particular painting, I sort of was suffering from flat face syndrome. Right now, you can still see the face feels pretty flat. So at the end of the painting, I went in and added some uh, extra shadow to round it out. I don't think it's in this recording, so you'll have to see the final illustration to pick that up. Um, cool. So I've guess here now I'm working into the other aspects of the wagon, and I have some reference handy on my other window, so I think looking for the structures and how things are built and how they're put together is kind of, for me, really important to a degree. I don't need every nut and bolt. I'm not uh, meticulously or, you know, the worst, I call it sometimes plagiarizing photographs. It's like, don't plagiarize your photograph or of your reference. Look at the reference for, an understanding. Try to internalize or understand the pieces and the shapes that make up the object you're painting, and then go from there. You don't need to, and that took me a long time to learn. I think as an artist, when I was in art school, we didn't have Google images to just find a gazillion images. Oh, we did actually, but if you typed in elephant, you would get about 5 or 6 elephant images, and then it would just be repeat. Like you would go next page, and it would just sort of repeat. And I used to always just want that reference exactly uh, the angle and lighting that I was painting. Well, I've come a long way since then and realized that I can understand the volumes, forms, textures from just about any light angle or any, 3/4 or side view. You can sort of approximate between a couple of photos what all the volumes are, and then I just paint it because I've understand in my mind now what the volumes and how light would affect those simple volumes. Anyway, here I am trying to find a good way to paint the texture or the what do you call it, the tread on the tires, and I'm kind of experimenting with a few different things. I've done tire tread so many times that I kind of wanted to do it a little bit different and try something. I always, when it comes to things like this tire tread, you often find it's a very complex thing that could take a really, really long time to paint if you were to paint each tread. And then what's sad about it is you can spend so much time doing it only to realize it looks awful and you've got to start over and find a different method. So I try to find ways that really, I'm not saying they're like tricks. I guess there maybe in the end it does become a bit of a parlor trick. But a way to simplify sort of the process. Because whenever you do something simple painting, right, it tends to be more effective visually, right? Because there's more of a graphic application of a realistic thing, an object, right? So you're simplifying and trying to make things not just lifelike, you're trying to make them better than life. And so here I found an interesting tire tread in my reference that had these sort of reversed or alternating chevron shapes. And once I sort of blocked 2 rows in, I could just copy, transform, modify. I could do some warping and get those in. and they're not overlaid. They're not. There's no fancy blending mode happening. It's just locking the pixels and then painting them the values and the texture that I want. Um, Great. So yeah, you saw right. You might have noticed I just made a little adjustment to the wagon wheel arm. I wanted to have it touching the ground, and that's always one of the best things about Photoshop is your ability to manipulate a fully painted piece and not have to repaint it. You just transform it, bend it, twist it. There you go. Here I am beginning to want to add a little bit more character to the wagon. I don't want, you always want in your scene things to feel like they have some history. They've been used. They're not just these, everything's not like, wow, we went out to the uh, local Walmart or Target and bought all of these props and placed them in our photograph or our photo shoot, and everything is perfectly new. So yeah, always looking for ways to add a history to each object or prop in a scene is a big thing, and sometimes it doesn't happen. It's not something you have to kind of start with right away. It can be layered in, and as you work the painting, you just kind of go, hey, you know what? Let's do this. Let's add the dent and some scratches and some personality, if you will. So here I am with the towel, and I'm playing around with some colors and some stripes and some things to make it look kind of give the feel of a beach towel a little bit more. Like, hey, yeah, we're going to the beach. It's a beach towel, something you might see at a hotel. Um, and so yeah, I'm playing around with some color shifts right there. I did use a multiply layer to get the color. I always, whenever you do stripes or some sort of pattern on top of an already painted object, using multiply is a nice way because it just inherits the values underneath, and then you don't have to repaint those values. So that's always a pretty helpful thing to do. And now we're going into the some of the background parts of this, and I think there's a part of this video where I took a break and forgot to hit record, so you might see a jump in time somewhere. Um, so when you get into backgrounds of obviously here's a scene. I'm gonna have some word bubbles, and it's gonna cover up some of the background anyway. Nevertheless, you still want to have some fun details in your backgrounds. And to me, the most important thing really is to just use lighting as a way to stage your characters, right? I already know more or less where my light direction is coming from. I've done a few pages before this one, and I've kind of already established where my light direction is coming from. In a children's book, the continuity of lighting is probably um, you know, I'd say probably 99% of any children's book I've ever read and looked at, lighting continuity doesn't exist. Partially because they're just so stylized, and sometimes there's there almost is no environment. It can be sort of an abstract. Since I'm an animation and film guy and doing a children's book, I sort of have it in my mind that I have to have continuity of lighting between shots, and it's almost like you're doing a color script for a film. In any case, so I've kind of started looking at always, and I'll remember this lesson I learned from another artist at Disney who said, I showed him a piece I was working on, and I asked, "What do you think about the lighting?" And he said, or no, "What do you think about the image?" He said, "Well, it looks really nice. The rendering's nice, but you know, I think you could do some really neat things with the shadows and make the design stronger." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean? Like, did I not do it accurately?" And he's like, "No, yeah, I think you probably did it too accurately. You're not taking advantage of uh, your ability to design your composition by manipulating the shadows, right? Taking some artistic license." So ever since that discussion I've always thought of shadows and lighting as a way to direct the eye throughout a composition, and that would give you some leeway or some creative license to kind of do what you want. Up and there's the jump in time. So yeah, I think always think of lighting as a compositional tool, right? And a mood tool and a tone of your painting, and not so much like, oh, I'm just trying to accurately recreate the lighting that um, is that should be there, or that I've declared like this is where the light source is, so everything must match that. Um, there is a, I mean, we've had some conversations actually recently at work about uh, light logic, and light logic is very, very important, and it's something I think you should always take into consideration with everything you do. I think that's how you start a painting, is with, put a light here, what happens? Put a light here, what happens? Um, the nice thing is there's an unlimited amount of invisible lights you can drop into your scene to create extra bounce light or fill, some rim or kicker. And so as an illustrator, sometimes these tools or that ability gets the best of us and we overdo it. Other times uh, if we do it with restraint, we can get some pretty awesome results. Cool, so there's the end of that. Let me go ahead and just show you. Here's the final image, at least as it stands now. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please subscribe, like the video, and post in the comments any other kind of videos or subject matters or things that you'd like me to cover. I would love to hear your feedback and see what are those, if you have any question, any video you would love that you feel like is missing in the YouTube world, let me know and I'll make that video for you and put it out there.